She went to the gynecologist absolutely mortified, but what she saw left her speechless. Before we dive into this captivating story, we invite you to leave a like and subscribe to the channel to support our work. We hope you enjoy it. The morning in San Francisco began cloaked in a light mist as Olivia Brooks made her way down the wide avenues leading to the entrance of the prestigious West Bay Women's Health Center, one of the city's most advanced and respected clinics for women's health. From the outside, its glass facade reflected the gray sky, and inside, everything seemed flawless. Polished marble floors, soft ambient lighting, and contemporary art adorning the walls to create a serene environment for patients. Yet none of those elegant details could calm the whirlwind of anxiety churning inside Olivia's chest. Her palms were sweating as she gripped the clipboard with the intake form, fingers clutching the pen too tightly, as if holding onto it could keep her from bolting out the door. She had always been a reserved young woman, not used to exposing herself to uncomfortable situations, and this moment pushed her far beyond any comfort zone she'd ever known. As she filled in the fields, full name, date of birth, medical history, Olivia felt her stomach twist. Every blank line seemed impossibly heavy. She tried to stay composed, but just the thought of being there, on the verge of undergoing a gynecological exam, made her heart pound uncontrollably. For years, she had come up with excuses to postpone this appointment, convincing herself it wasn't necessary or that it could wait a little longer. But the past few weeks had brought symptoms she could no longer ignore. After countless late-night internet searches and growing discomfort, she realized that procrastinating only deepened her unease. Taking a deep breath, she discreetly wiped her damp palms on the sides of her jeans and forced herself to keep filling out each line of the form, even with her hands trembling slightly. It was just a checkup, she repeated silently, something women went through every day without fuss. But to her, it felt like stepping into a storm no one else could see. The reception door opened with a soft click, and a nurse called her name with a clear, professional voice, Olivia Brooks. The sound rang in her ears like an unexpected bell, making her flinch slightly. Olivia stood up almost with a jolt, as if pulled by an invisible string. The clipboard still clutched tightly in her hands. She followed the nurse down a pristine corridor where each step echoed in her overwhelmed mind. They passed several closed doors, each marked with a discreet sign, constantly reminding her of what was ahead. The air had that familiar, clinical scent, a mix of absolute cleanliness with an attempt to make the space feel welcoming. But nothing in that hallway did anything to ease her nerves. When they reached the consultation room and she was invited to sit, Olivia did so stiffly, her hands interlocked in her lap, as if that alone could hold back the growing unease inside her. She let her gaze wander around the room, neatly arranged with medical equipment on subtle shelves, a modern painting on the wall, and in the corner, the examination chair, looming larger than life in her eyes. Olivia quickly looked away, feeling the heat rise in her cheeks as she struggled not to think about what was coming. In her mind, she rehearsed what she might say, the questions she wanted to ask, even though she doubted her voice would cooperate. But nothing, absolutely nothing, could have prepared her for the moment the door opened. When she looked up, she found herself staring at a man who shattered every expectation she had built. He wasn't the older, stern-looking physician her mind had imagined. Standing before her was Dr. Nathan Blake, young, poised, striking in presence, and with eyes that balanced impeccable professionalism with a kind of intensity that was impossible to ignore. Nathan Blake was far more than just a respected doctor. Considered one of the most brilliant gynecologists on the West Coast, he had amassed a remarkable fortune for someone his age, thanks to cutting-edge research, patented innovations in women's treatments, and consulting work with the nation's top pharmaceutical companies. His name frequently appeared in prestigious medical journals, and although he maintained a low profile about his wealth, there was no denying his success had made him widely admired, and in more private circles, even envied. He closed the office door with calm, fluid movements and approached the desk, his steel blue eyes immediately catching the hesitation on Olivia's face. "Miss Brooks," he greeted her with a steady, reassuring tone, offering a professional smile that somehow felt genuinely warm. She tried to respond, but her voice got stuck in her throat, suffocated by the mix of nerves and surprise that had suddenly taken hold of her. He introduced himself calmly, though he didn't need to. His name was already well known to anyone who had done even a little research on the best specialists. As he slowly skimmed through her file, Nathan maintained the confident posture of someone who knew his field inside and out. Still, his sharp eyes didn't miss the subtle signs of Olivia's anxiety. The way she clasped her hands in her lap, the slight tremble in her shoulders, the flush that spread across her cheeks. There was a vulnerability in her that stirred something in him, a heightened sense of attentiveness, a genuine desire to ensure that every moment of that appointment was handled with absolute respect and care. For Nathan, who had seen patients of every background, Olivia was different, not just because of how nervous she was, but because of the authenticity in her every restrained gesture. Even as he maintained his professional composure, he could already tell this appointment wasn't going to be like the others. As he reviewed the details in the file, Nathan spoke with his usual practice calm, outlining the next steps clearly in an effort to put Olivia at ease. While his words were routine to him, he could tell that, for her, each one carried its own emotional weight. Olivia felt her emotional defenses faltering under the doctor's respectful demeanor and magnetic presence, creating a contradiction inside her. Part of her wanted to run, but another part, quietly, wanted to stay. She knew this consultation was necessary, but what she hadn't expected was how Nathan Blake's mere presence would stir emotions far beyond the walls of that exam room. And deep down, some part of her was beginning to realize that this encounter might not just be an awkward appointment, but the start of something completely unexpected. The following afternoon seemed perfectly crafted to intensify the restlessness Olivia was trying to suppress. The sky over San Francisco, still blanketed in a thin layer of clouds, mirrored the storm of thoughts that had been swirling inside her since leaving the clinic. She did her best to keep her mind occupied with routine tasks, but no matter how hard she tried, her focus kept slipping back to what had happened in the consultation room. The memory of Nathan's attentive gaze, the calm in his voice as he explained each step of the exam, the steadiness of his hands, confident yet gentle, kept resurfacing in her mind, bringing with it a quiet warmth in her chest. No matter how much she tried to rationalize it, Olivia couldn't shake the intensity of the impression he had left on her. It went far beyond the professional setting that had brought them together. Sitting in the small reading corner of her apartment, she flipped through a book without absorbing a single word. Her eyes moved across the lines, but her mind replaced the text with vivid images of Nathan, his slight frown as he reviewed her chart, his serene voice echoing like a soothing melody in her ears. There was something about him that challenged every expectation she had held, something she couldn't quite define, yet felt growing stronger every time she recalled their encounter. Olivia knew she was dealing with more than just the nerves of a first-time gynecological appointment. Without meaning to, she was grappling with a quiet attraction that had taken root uninvited, shaping itself in every unintentional memory, in every racing heartbeat when she thought of him. At that very moment, on the other side of the city, Nathan Blake was reviewing medical reports in his glass-walled office overlooking the Silver Line of San Francisco Bay. Even though his schedule was packed with responsibilities, scientific publications, and meetings with executives eager to secure his consultancy, that afternoon his mind kept circling back to one particular memory: Olivia Brooks's uneasy expression. He had seen countless patients over the years from all walks of life, and he had learned to read the emotions they often try to hide. But Olivia was different. There was something disarmingly honest in her vulnerability, something that reached a part of him untouched by the usual clinical detachment. Despite all his experience, he could feel his attention shifting, becoming more personal than he was willing to admit. Nathan recognized the signs of his own growing interest, and though he tried to keep his feelings at a professional distance, he knew he wouldn't be able to ignore them for much longer. As he flipped through his notes from her exam, one particular detail caught his attention: the follow-up instructions he had given Olivia. It was clear she needed to return for further evaluation, but something told him she might hesitate. He knew well the kinds of resistance some patients developed, especially those more prone to anxiety around intimate exams. And in Olivia's case, he sensed a deeper layer, an emotional hesitancy not just rooted in physical discomfort, but in the fear of exposure itself, of breaking through the protective walls she'd built throughout her life. While Nathan debated how best to ensure she wouldn't neglect her health, Olivia was staring at her phone in her apartment, breath caught in her throat. A new notification from the clinic had just popped up, reminding her to schedule a follow-up appointment. Her fingers hovered over the screen for a long moment, as if replying to the message carried a weight far heavier than simply booking another consultation. She knew she needed to go back, that avoiding it would only make things worse. But part of her wasn't afraid of the appointment itself. It was everything Nathan had awakened in her that made her hesitate. Still, she didn't delete the message. She left it there in plain sight, like a silent signal that the decision was still pending but unavoidable. An unspoken tension lingered between them, silent, invisible, like a promise left hanging in the air. Both of them, in their own ways, felt that what had begun in that first appointment was far from over. Nathan knew he couldn't push her to return. Professionalism demanded restraint and respect for the patient's timing. But deep down, a certainty was beginning to form with growing clarity. If Olivia chose to come back, he would be there, waiting for her, not just as a doctor, but as a man whose curiosity and admiration for her only deepened with each passing thought. On her side, a quiet conflict raged, an inner struggle between caution and the growing desire to see him again, not just to resolve her medical doubts, but to understand why the mere thought of Nathan Blake made her heart beat in ways she could no longer control. The passing days brought no relief to the unease that had settled deep in Olivia's chest. On the contrary, each morning seemed to arrive with a little more weight, as if time itself were conspiring to keep her tangled in the thoughts that spun endlessly around Nathan Blake. She tried to convince herself that the lingering discomfort was just anxiety, that maybe her emotions were exaggerating the symptoms. But reality had a way of forcing itself in, undeniably. The physical discomfort hadn't gone away, and with it came a constant reminder of the unfinished consultation, of the follow-up she had yet to schedule, whether out of pride or fear. Every clinic notification she ignored felt like an invisible weight piling on her shoulders, pressing down until it became hard to breathe without remembering what she hadn't done. In her small apartment overlooking the hills of San Francisco, Olivia kept herself busy with everyday tasks that, under normal circumstances, might have offered her a sense of calm. Organizing books, watering the plants, making tea, but nothing distracted her long enough. Her mind always circled back to the same place. Nathan's eyes during the appointment, the calm and certainty in his voice, the respectful and steady way he handled each step of the exam. There was something in him that went beyond medical expertise, something that had slipped under her skin and stirred emotions she could no longer contain. Each memory brought with it a subtle warmth, accompanied by a rising restlessness that she couldn't name but couldn't ignore either. Meanwhile, Nathan Blake continued moving through the intense rhythm of his daily routine, juggling appointments, research meetings, and high-level conferences with pharmaceutical executives. His name, already well-established thanks to revolutionary patents in gynecology, was often mentioned in both academic and corporate circles. Yet even with his calendar packed full, there was still a space in his mind that Olivia Brooks kept occupying. Every time he reviewed the list of patients still awaiting follow-ups, his eyes would inevitably land on her name. He wondered if she was avoiding the reminders out of simple resistance, or if something deeper was holding her back. As a doctor, he knew it was his responsibility to ensure she received proper care. But as a man, he couldn't help the quiet longing to see her again, to hear her voice, to meet that guarded spark in her eyes once more. It was on an especially gray afternoon, after a draining meeting, that Nathan decided to seek out a brief escape at the cafe near his clinic. It was a spot he liked for its low-key atmosphere, a place where he could briefly step away from the non-stop pace of his world. As he stepped through the door, his eyes scanned the room, more out of habit than any real expectation. But what he saw made his chest tighten slightly. Sitting near the window, flipping through a book with a distracted look, was Olivia. She seemed absorbed, her eyes on the pages, but her expression gave her away. Lost in thought, her mind clearly far beyond whatever words were printed in front of her. Nathan stood still for a moment, taking in the scene, noticing every detail of her posture, the subtle movements of her hands, as if those small gestures were telling a silent story he ached to understand. Without hesitation, he walked toward her, fully aware that this unplanned encounter carried a significance far greater than any scheduled meeting. Olivia looked up as she sensed someone approaching, and for a split second, their eyes locked as if time itself had slowed down. The initial surprise quickly gave way to a wave of confused emotions, but she held her composure, offering him a small smile, shy, but with a flicker of genuine joy. Nathan, as graceful as always, asked if he could join her, and Olivia, ignoring every inner defense that told her to keep her distance, quietly gestured to the chair across from hers. It was a simple act, but one that carried far more meaning than she would ever admit out loud. As they shared that unexpected moment, conversation flowed with surprising ease. Nathan, careful not to cross her comfort boundaries, kept things light, chatting about the city, San Francisco's unpredictable weather, and the vibrant cultural energy of its historic neighborhoods. Olivia, reserved at first, slowly began to let her guard down. Away from the sterile walls of the clinic, Nathan was even more captivating. His intelligence showed effortlessly, and his focus never strayed from her, as though nothing else in the room mattered. With each exchange, with every glance shared, there was no denying the magnetic pull between them, a silent current that pushed past the professional roles they tried so hard to maintain. Their conversation lasted longer than either of them had anticipated. When they finally said goodbye, it was with a look charged with things left unsaid. Olivia walked out of the cafe with her heart racing, knowing that this brief encounter had left a deeper imprint on her than she was prepared to handle. Nathan, watching her leave, stood still for a moment, wearing an expression that mixed quiet satisfaction with a restrained longing, knowing that what had just happened was more than coincidence. It might have been, in spite of all logic and reason, the beginning of something neither of them could fully control. In the days that followed that unexpected meeting at the cafe, Olivia did everything she could to keep her routine as normal as possible, as if the discipline of daily life could quiet the growing unrest that Nathan Blake had stirred in her. Still, every attempt at distraction fell flat. Even when she focused on work or simple chores around the house, her thoughts kept circling back to that moment. The warmth of his presence, so close, the way he looked at her with genuine attention, unhurried, as if she were the only person in that crowded room. The lingering physical discomfort, still subtle but present, served as a constant reminder that there were things left unresolved. Not just medically, but emotionally, too. Things she had been trying hard to suppress. As she walked the streets of San Francisco on her way to work, Olivia found herself haunted by involuntary memories. A pharmacy window displaying pamphlets on women's health. The reflection of lights in the subway windows that seemed to mirror her own doubts. Even the sea salt breeze carrying back the memory of Nathan's deep, steady gaze. She tried to rationalize it all as coincidence, but her heart told a different story. It felt as though the universe, in quiet, subtle ways, was nudging her toward this man who, against all odds, had breached her most guarded walls and left behind a mark she couldn't erase. Nathan, on his side, hadn't been immune to the impact of their reunion either. Even with his high-stakes schedule, meetings with investors, discussions about new medical patents that could transform gynecological care, Olivia occupied a space in his mind that refused to be ignored. He kept replaying every detail of their conversation at the cafe. Her expressions, the subtle shifts in her tone, the tiny things she probably didn't even realize she was doing, but that had somehow etched themselves into his memory. His professional curiosity had been satisfied with her initial diagnosis, but his personal curiosity grew by the day. What drove him wasn't just a physician's concern for a patient's well-being. It was something deeper, something that defied logic and stepped beyond any ethical boundary he normally lived by. One afternoon, after finishing a conference with executives from a lab interested in licensing one of his latest research projects, Nathan took a walk through the city in search of a moment of peace. Guided by a quiet impulse he couldn't quite explain, he found himself passing by the bookstore where he knew Olivia worked. The cozy interior, lined with shelves of overflowing volumes and filled with the scent of fresh paper and brewed coffee, was a soothing contrast to the cold, polished corridors of the corporate world he usually inhabited. Behind the counter, he saw her, focused on organizing a stack of books, her brow slightly furrowed in concentration. Something about the scene touched him deeply. Her quiet authenticity, the care she brought even to simple tasks, the soft glimmer in her eyes whenever her fingers brushed across the book covers. Olivia looked up, sensing his presence before actually seeing him. The surprise made her catch her breath for a second, but she quickly regained composure and greeted him with a shy, restrained smile. Nathan returned it with the same natural ease he had shown at the cafe, stepping up to the counter as if this encounter were just as casual as the last. They talked for a few minutes, and every word exchanged seemed to reinforce a silent connection that both recognized, even if neither dared to speak it aloud. During the conversation, Nathan noticed something subtle, Olivia lightly resting her hand over her abdomen. It didn't escape him. It was enough to confirm what he'd already suspected. She still hadn't resolved the issue that had brought her into his office in the first place. With the same delicacy that defined him, he didn't press the matter. He knew that pushing her now might only push her away. Instead, he allowed just enough of his concern to show, tucked between light words and an easy smile, to make it clear he genuinely cared. Olivia, perceptive as ever, picked up on what he wasn't saying, and something about the way he noticed her without judgment or pressure made her feel safe, like her vulnerability wasn't something to hide, but something that could be seen and accepted. They parted shortly afterward, a quiet understanding passing between them that this wouldn't be their last conversation. As she watched him walk away, Olivia realized her resistance was beginning to crack, not only because of his gentle persistence, but because deep down she wanted to see him again more than she wanted to admit. That night, alone in her apartment, Olivia mentally replayed every moment of their brief encounter. Her hands rested gently over her abdomen, and she knew, without needing to say it aloud, that the decision she had been putting off could no longer wait. Nathan had planted something inside her that day, something small but powerful, the seed of courage. And for the first time, she wondered if going back to the clinic would be just about her health, or if it might also be a chance to begin writing a chapter of her life she'd never had the courage to start before. The next morning, as the soft sunlight filtered through the curtains of her bedroom, Olivia stayed in bed a little longer than usual, allowing herself to feel every signal her body was sending. The discomfort she had been trying to ignore over the past few days was still there, stubbornly reminding her that something unresolved still demanded her attention. Unlike all the other times when she chose to push the thoughts aside and mask her worries behind the distractions of daily life, this time she knew she couldn't keep avoiding it. The night before, marked by Nathan's unexpected presence at the bookstore, had planted a renewed restlessness in her chest. It wasn't just worry anymore. It was a quiet but powerful urge to face things head-on, with the courage she had lacked until now. Driven by this newfound determination, Olivia got up and, after going through her usual morning routine almost on autopilot, sat at the kitchen table with her phone in hand. For several long minutes, she stared at the screen as if her fate were waiting on the other side of that call. She knew postponing it wouldn't make any difference. And for the first time, what stirred inside her wasn't just fear of hearing a diagnosis. It was the hope of seeing him again, of being close to that steady, reassuring presence that had left such a deep impression on her. Refusing to let hesitation win this time, she dialed the clinic's number and, with a voice steadier than she expected, scheduled her return. When the call ended, a wave of relief washed over her, as if simply taking control had given her back some of the peace she'd been missing. Nathan, meanwhile, was reviewing a few reports when he received the notification about her appointment. His eyes paused on the screen for a beat, and a quiet sense of satisfaction crossed his face. It wasn't just the conscientious doctor in him who recognized the importance of that step Olivia had taken. It was also the man who had silently hoped she would choose to come back. There was something deeply personal in the way he had been following her case. Olivia wasn't just another name on a chart or a clinical issue waiting for a solution. She was the woman who, since that very first consultation, had shaken the foundations of his meticulously structured life, awakening feelings he thought had long been buried beneath years of professional focus and success. On the day of the appointment, Olivia walked through the busy streets of San Francisco with her heart racing at a pace she could barely manage. It wasn't fear of the exam or of any possible diagnosis that sped her pulse. It was the anticipation of seeing him again. When she entered the clinic, she was greeted with the usual politeness. But before she could even sit down in the waiting room, Nathan was already stepping out of his office to greet her in person. The gesture, simple but filled with meaning, warmed her immediately. He guided her to the consultation room with a level of attentiveness that went far beyond standard protocol, and Olivia felt that within that space, she wasn't just a patient receiving care. She was someone being seen genuinely and completely. During the appointment, Nathan maintained the composure he was known for, but his focus on her was clearly more intense than with any other patient. He performed the exam with his usual precision and, in the end, confirmed his initial suspicion. It was a minor condition, easily treatable with the right medication. The news brought Olivia a wave of relief that reached far beyond the medical concern. It felt as though resolving that issue had freed up space in her heart. Space she could finally use to confront the emotion she had kept bottled up for so long. Nathan noticed the change in her instantly, the way her shoulders relaxed, how her gaze softened with a new kind of calm. In the quiet that followed his explanation of the treatment, there was a look between them that said more than any words ever could. Before wrapping up the appointment, Nathan hesitated for just a moment, something that was rare for him. He was usually so sure of his actions, so precise in his words. But this time, he let a comment slip that carried a subtle weight, not lost on Olivia. He mentioned that once the treatment was complete, she'd be fully recovered, and then, with a faint smile, added that while the clinical part would be behind them, he'd be happy to see her again under different circumstances, away from the paperwork and protocols. The look that accompanied his words was as clear as day, and Olivia, surprised by his gentle boldness, responded with a smile that, though reserved, silently accepted what had just been offered. As she left the clinic that morning, Olivia felt that a significant page in her life had just been turned, not just because of the successful treatment, but because of the clarity she now had about Nathan. She knew he had stepped past the boundaries of professionalism, and in doing so, had created space for her to finally lower her own defenses. There was something between them that was stronger than coincidence, deeper than the formal roles of doctor and patient. It was a connection that, freed from the constraints of circumstance, now presented itself as something real and alive, a possibility she could no longer ignore. The days following the appointment brought Olivia a sense of relief so powerful it felt almost tangible. The lightness in her body showed in the way she walked through the city streets, in how she looked into store windows during her daily commutes, and even in the spontaneous smile that appeared on her face without her realizing it. Being free from the constant worry about her health was, in itself, a massive release, but there was something even more powerful happening inside her. Now that the physical concerns had been resolved, she was left to face what had always lingered beneath her medical anxiety: the undeniable attraction she felt for Nathan Blake, the doctor who had not only diagnosed her with brilliance, but who had also occupied her thoughts with a disarming intensity. Nathan, for his part, felt that same awakening inside him. Even while immersed in his ambitious projects, negotiating new patents for medications that could revolutionize treatments in partnership with some of the country's leading pharmaceutical companies, his mind always wandered back to Olivia Brooks. He remembered their appointments with unusual clarity, the way she had tried to hide her apprehension, the vulnerability that peeked through her subtle gestures, and the quiet strength that had begun to emerge from her. With the medical situation now resolved, Nathan knew there were no longer any ethical boundaries keeping them apart. More than that, he sensed he was standing before something rare. The chance to get to know Olivia, and not as a patient, but as a woman, authentic, intriguing, and capable of shaking the foundations of a man everyone thought unshakable. No longer willing to hide behind the excuses that had previously kept her at a distance, Olivia accepted the invitation Nathan had extended so naturally at the end of their last appointment. The proposal had been simple, unassuming in form, but loaded with unspoken meaning. Dinner at a cozy restaurant, far from the white walls of the clinic. On the day of their date, as she got ready, Olivia felt a mix of nervousness and anticipation guiding her every move. From choosing the dress to the moment she looked at herself in the mirror and finally allowed herself to smile with genuine confidence. For the first time, she didn't see herself as the shy girl afraid to reveal her feelings, but as a woman ready to embrace whatever life had so carefully aligned in front of her. When Nathan saw her that evening, he immediately sensed something different about her. Olivia carried herself with more confidence, and in her gaze was a new kind of light, as if her physical recovery had awakened a dormant self-assurance. He greeted her with the same refined politeness as always, but this time his eyes didn't hide the sincere admiration he felt. They walked together to the table he had reserved, and their conversation began to flow effortlessly. The formalities were gone, along with the weight of medical concerns. They spoke of their passions, their life stories, the dreams they rarely voiced aloud. Nathan shared accounts of his meteoric rise in medicine, of sleepless nights spent investing in his own research until he gained national recognition, something all the more remarkable considering how young he had achieved it. Olivia listened with genuine fascination, admiring not just his success, but the humanity that shone through every detail of his story. The world around them seemed to slowly dissolve, as if the universe had conspired to place them in a bubble where only the two of them existed. The lingering glances, the soft smiles exchanged between sentences, the way Nathan leaned in slightly to hear her better. Everything contributed to an atmosphere thick with anticipation. Olivia felt that with every passing minute, her resistance was melting like morning mist under sunlight. What remained was the simple, undeniable truth of her desire for him. Nathan, in turn, sensed that beneath Olivia's elegance and poise, there was a fire just waiting to be lit. The kind of fire that needed only the right breath to come alive. After dinner, they walked slowly through the city's glowing streets, prolonging the evening for no other reason than wanting to stay in each other's company. When they reached the entrance to Olivia's building, a natural pause fell between them, a moment suspended in time, full of unspoken possibilities. Nathan looked at her with a calm intensity, lifting his hand as if to touch her face, but hesitated, leaving the decision to her. Without a word, Olivia leaned in slightly, her silent gesture more eloquent than anything she could have said. Nathan closed the space between them, and when their lips finally met, the kiss they shared was everything they had been holding back until that moment. An exchange of restrained desire, unspoken emotions, and a connection that now revealed itself as fully real and utterly inevitable. As they pulled away just enough to look at each other, their eyes met in a quiet exchange of promises. There was no longer any doubt between them. What had started as a clinical coincidence, a simple routine appointment, had transformed into something far greater, deeper, and more extraordinary than either of them could have imagined. There, under the soft lights of a city that never sleeps, Olivia and Nathan were no longer patient and doctor, but two souls who had found each other against all odds. That night had left such a vivid imprint on Olivia that when she woke the next morning, she could still feel the echo of the emotions that had overflowed between her and Nathan. As the day began outside her window, bringing with it the rush of city life, inside her apartment a quiet stillness lingered, almost as if time had slowed down just to let her savor each memory of the night before. Her fingers, almost absent-mindedly, brushed her lips, as if they could still feel the warmth of the kiss exchanged beneath the glow of the streetlights. The smile that formed was spontaneous, effortless, the reflection of a heart no longer trying to resist what had become inevitable. That morning, Olivia didn't need to make excuses to herself anymore. She was fully, unapologetically immersed in the feelings she had for Nathan. Across town, Nathan started his day with the same quiet restlessness that hummed through Olivia. In his modern penthouse, he reviewed financial reports tied to the final approval stage of his latest patent. Still young, he had built a remarkable fortune through a rare combination of brilliance and relentless perseverance. traits that had earned him not just respect in the field of medicine, but also a strong foothold in the competitive world of medical consulting and tech investment. But that morning, neither impressive figures nor investor meetings held his attention. All he could see in his mind was Olivia, her radiant eyes reflecting not just the streetlights, but something deeper, a glow he knew he'd never forget. Throughout the day, as both tried to carry on with their routines, there was an invisible thread pulling them closer, its pull growing stronger with each passing hour. At the bookstore, while Olivia organized shelves, her eyes often lost focus, drifting from the titles in front of her to memories of Nathan's words and gestures. There was a vibrant expectation pulsing in her chest, a sense that the moment they'd shared wasn't just a passing coincidence. Nathan, caught up in strategic meetings about the expansion of his medical consulting firm, found his thoughts just as divided. In every pause between conversations, he drifted back to those fleeting moments with Olivia, more and more certain that their story had only just begun. Late in the afternoon, as if drawn by some silent synchronicity, they crossed paths once again, this time in a setting less planned, but just as symbolic. Olivia was leaving the bookstore after her shift when she spotted him across the street, leaning casually against the side of a sleek car, scanning the crowd as if he were looking for someone. When she saw him, her heart skipped a beat, as though it already knew the significance of that moment. Nathan crossed the street with steady steps, his eyes locked on her like the rest of the world had faded away. Without hesitation, he stopped in front of her, and the smile he gave her held the same intensity as the one from the night before. Only now, it was infused with a calm certainty, as if what came next between them no longer needed to be questioned. Olivia didn't need a formal invitation. With a subtle nod and a sparkle in her eyes that spoke of anticipation and longing, she accepted Nathan's silent gesture to join him. Evening had begun to settle over San Francisco, and the city lights flickered on like quiet witnesses to a story unfolding in real time. They walked side by side, their conversation light but charged with a quiet urgency that echoed in lingering glances and the soft, fleeting smiles exchanged between words. With every step, the atmosphere thickened, laced with anticipation, as though they both knew this night wouldn't end like the ones before, that there was no longer space for hesitation or doubt. They arrived at Nathan's apartment, nestled in one of the city's most impressive buildings, with a sweeping view of the bay. Inside, the space was elegant and warm, designed not only for high-level negotiations, but also for moments of real, personal intimacy. As they stepped inside, a subtle shiver ran down Olivia's spine, not from nerves, but from anticipation. Nathan, always attuned to her energy, reached out to help her with her coat, and the moment their fingers touched, the spark between them reignited without a word. She looked at him with a gaze that held nothing back, and he, no longer disguising the desire burning quietly within him, returned her look with one that said everything they didn't need to say out loud. Without rushing, as if savoring every second, Nathan led her into the living room where the city shimmered just beyond the wide windows. In that gentle light, they finally allowed themselves to cross the invisible threshold that had separated them until now. The kiss that followed was deeper than the first, filled with emotion and longing, a mutual acknowledgement of what they had both tried to contain for far too long. Their hands intertwined effortlessly, and their bodies drew close until there was no space left between them, as though they both knew that this was the moment when their stories would finally become one. That night, they gave in completely to what they felt, letting all the desire that had been building transform into something real, in an intimacy rooted not just in attraction, but in the powerful emotional connection that had been growing every day. It wasn't just physical chemistry that brought them together, but a quiet certainty that what they were experiencing was something greater, something rare and precious. Wrapped in Nathan's arms, Olivia understood she had found more than an exceptional doctor or a brilliant millionaire. She had found a man who saw all of her, who looked beyond appearances and welcomed her vulnerabilities with respect and sincere desire. By the time dawn approached and the city outside began to settle into silence, Olivia and Nathan remained together, sharing not just space, but the unspoken promise of a story still in its infancy. In that calm, meaningful moment, they both knew they had crossed a point of no return, and what lay ahead was a path they would choose to walk side by side, guided not by chance, but by the mutual recognition that in one another they had found everything they never dared to hope for. The weeks that followed felt different for Olivia and Nathan, as if time now moved at its own rhythm, one where each day carried the quiet glow of a shared discovery. There was no rush between them, only a crystal-clear understanding in how they approached each other, day after day, building a bond that didn't quite fit any conventional definition. Olivia, once so marked by timidity and fear of vulnerability, now allowed herself to live this story with a calm intensity, as though beside Nathan, she had finally found a safe space where she could fully be herself. It was a version of her no longer hidden behind fragile defenses, but instead whole and unguarded, supported by the trust that bloomed with every glance, every thoughtful gesture between them. Nathan, who had always moved through a fast-paced world of early triumphs and constant recognition, found, for the first time, that his attention was no longer anchored to the results of his negotiations or the breakthroughs of his patents. Instead, it rested on the simple details of being with Olivia. Being around her brought him a peace he hadn't known he was missing, a balance none of his past achievements had ever delivered. He admired her quiet intelligence, her sharp sensitivity, the way she poured herself into deep conversations or found ease in shared silences. With each passing day, he realized that what had sparked between them during that first appointment, however unlikely it may have seemed, was a story destined to grow into something solid and true. What began as casual outings turned into lingering dinners, walks along the edge of the bay, and late afternoons spent in carefree conversation at cozy cafes scattered across the city. Over time, Olivia also came to know the quieter, less visible parts of Nathan's life, the side that went beyond headlines about his financial and medical accomplishments. She discovered his quiet love for modern art, his habit of skipping parties in favor of nighttime reading, and even his nearly secret talent for playing piano on the rare nights he needed to clear his mind. These seemingly small things were, to her, precious pieces of the mosaic that made up a man who, despite his overwhelming success, remained incredibly human, accessible, and deeply attuned to the subtleties of the world around him. The way their worlds blended so naturally left little doubt for anyone close to them. Nathan's friends, used to seeing him guarded when it came to matters of the heart, quickly noticed the difference Olivia brought into his life. And though she had initially feared being seen as just a fleeting curiosity in Nathan's sophisticated circle, she soon realized she wasn't regarded as an accessory to his image, but as an integral part of his life. Nathan made that clear in the smallest but most meaningful ways. A gentle hand on her back as he introduced her at intimate events, a look of shared understanding whenever someone tried, and failed, to reduce her to a passing presence. There was a silent understanding between them that what they shared held far more weight than either had anticipated. It wasn't a temporary distraction, nor a romance fueled only by the spark of something new. It was a bond built on mutual respect, on genuine admiration that grew with each day, nourished by the authenticity of every interaction. Beside Nathan, Olivia rediscovered her own courage, not just to love, but to allow herself to be loved with the depth he so effortlessly gave. And Nathan, in turn, saw in her the very thing he had unknowingly searched for all along. A partnership that went beyond expectations, rooted in honest surrender and real connection. One especially clear night, as they walked along the bridge that crossed the still waters of the bay, Nathan stopped suddenly, gently pulling Olivia closer. There, beneath a sky scattered with stars and the distant whisper of waves, he looked into her eyes with a kind of intensity that made the rest of the world fade away. Without needing grand gestures or rehearsed lines, he simply whispered that she had changed his life in ways he never thought possible. Olivia, her chest warm with a deep, serene emotion, didn't answer with words, but with a smile that held all the certainty in the world. And so, beneath the soft glow of a city that never stopped pulsing, they quietly sealed what both had known since that very first glance in the consultation room. That some stories, no matter how unexpectedly they begin, are meant to become unforgettable. The end. What did you think of this story? Let us know in the comments, and tell us where you're watching from. See you next time.